This week, President Donald Trump is in Davos, Switzerland, for the World Economic Forum. It is a clash of countries. You have the EU on one side, the United States on the other, trying to negotiate over some key issues. Will America take the island nation of Greenland? Will the World Economic Order tilt left or tilt right? We're going to be talking about all of that and more on this week's episode of Rufo and Lomez. So, Lomez, the big news event this week is, of course, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And so it is this amazing moment where all of the kind of world leaders come into this small, skiing hamlet. And in theory, they're hashing out the world order. And in practice, however, things are a bit different with Trump. I think the idea behind Davos was all of the world leaders kind of agree with each other, maybe even more than they agree with their home populations. They'll sort it out. Have you been watching at least the clips or the speeches or the events from Davos? And what are your first impressions?
Yeah, I mean, I've been catching things on the periphery and kind of paying attention here and there, not to the specifics so much as the sort of general mood of the event. And it really does appear as if, there's a lot of bluster as it relates to Greenland and some other things going on, which we can get into. But there is some posturing, some really interesting posturing going on right now between the United States and Donald Trump and the representatives there, including Howard Lutnick. I think it was Lutnick. I don't know if you saw, there was a clip of him basically describing to the WEF audience why the WEF is such a sort of corrupt and obsolete and sort of like ossified organization instead of norms to govern this new world. And the Trump administration really is. And I think Greenland's sort of a proxy for this larger conversation or fight or negotiation, however you want to phrase it, over what comes next, how this new relationship between a United States, a kind of right-wing governance of the United States that is distinct from, as you said, the kind of international liberal governance that prevailed even in Trump's first term. So you had Trump as this kind of outside rogue force, but there was a kind of tacit agreement among everybody within the various bureaucracies and institutions. Okay, we're just going to kind of bide our time here, wait this out. Trump's going to go away, and then we'll return to normal. Or, if not exactly return to the status quo ante, we'll still be able to live in a world without Trump. We'll be able to live in a world that is still run by this liberal international order that is represented by like the EU bureaucrats and the kinds of people who show up at Davos and speak there. I think we're seeing now a real rejection and a real challenge.
And the Trump administration and myself, we are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind. And what we are here to say is that America First is a different model, one that we encourage other countries to consider, which is that our workers come first. We can have policies that impact our workers. Sovereignty is your borders. You're entitled to have borders. You shouldn't offshore your medicine. You shouldn't offshore your semiconductors. You shouldn't offshore your entire industrial base and have it be hollowed out beneath you. You should not be dependent for that which is fundamental to your sovereignty on any other nation. And if you're going to be dependent on someone, it darn well better be your best allies.
To that model. The other thing aside from Greenland that's happening is Trump has officially pulled us out of the WHO, which of course was so central in a lot of the public response and global response to COVID. And that has been a long time coming. So it's not like this is an abrupt change, but that is now formalized. And then there's this other thing happening with this Institute of Peace. I don't know if you're paying any attention to this Institute of Peace, but Trump is in some way creating here a kind of parallel sort of institution that in some way would govern or sort of take the place of what the UN has been doing. And there's a real tension about what that entails. Now, the kind of ostensible and proximate purpose for this new peace institute, so far as I understand it, is the rebuilding of Gaza. So it's like Jared Kushner talking about how we're going to rebuild Gaza. But actually, there's like a whole charter there that includes a much broader in scope and ambition project for this Peace Institute. So, okay, what does this represent? And now the last thing before I kick it to you, it seems to me here's like the fundamental fault line. The United States is clearly trying to reclaim a foreign policy posture where we prioritize the Western Hemisphere and take ownership of the Western Hemisphere. In other words, sort of declare in some sense, this is our territory, and we are going to run this how we see is most fit for the benefit of the United States, but also of the kind of subordinate states within that hemisphere. That's now our sort of like team, so to speak. And there's this question of where Europe, Western Europe in particular, and I'd include Scandinavia in that, of course, sits within this framework. Is Europe a part of our sphere of influence? And if not, what does that mean for these sort of long-run civilizational partners? I mean, we are European sort of civilizationally. So can we just kind of divorce ourselves, disaggregate ourselves from a foreign policy standpoint from Europe? And I think a lot of our European, like right-wing friends, people who really agree with us on most things, are a little bit ill at ease about some of this posturing because they're worried that Europe's now going to be forced to sort of retrench, to hedge their relationship with the U.S. and maybe make peace with, I don't know, who, Russia, China. It's sort of unclear. So what is our posture towards Europe now? How do we... Because we don't want Europe to sort of fall into the hands of these liberal international bureaucrats forever. We want our right-wing friends there to sort of be able to assert their own political dominance. But it seems like in some ways, similarly to what happened in Canada, if we press too hard here, that actually does a great favor for these liberal governments in Europe. So it is a bit complicated, and you know, it's going to require some sensitive touch here on the part of our negotiators.
Yeah, that seems right, but it seems to me that there is a common denominator to all of these global institutions, namely that America pays for the vast majority of the budget for all of them. Yeah. And so we enter into these negotiations as, you know, one nation among equals, but the reality is that we pay for all of this. And so we pay for NATO. We pay more than every European country combined for military expenses. We maintain bases in Italy and Germany and laboratories in Eastern Europe. I mean, the whole security infrastructure of Europe is backed entirely by the United States. The United Nations is, of course, in New York City, but also we spend the vast majority of the funds, more than any other nation. World Economic Forum is supported by American corporate interests with a kind of European, cosmopolitan, sophisticate feel. The WHO, again, we're the single largest contributor. And I think Trump's kind of fundamental point, and this is something that comes across sometimes as petty, right? He's like, Europe's got to pay more, you know, they got to pay more, they're ripping us off. He approaches it in a kind of blunt New York, you know, Queens real estate developer vernacular. But the point is actually really important. It's like, wait a minute, we pay for everything, but then we submit to the tyrannical impulses of these institutions that are reflected back upon us. No, we're not going to do that anymore. And he's been successful in some ways, unsuccessful in other ways. But merely by raising the question, I think it's very important. The other news that I saw recently and I think I have this right, is it true that Somalia is now the country in charge of the UN Security Council? I mean, it's something
I don't
amazing.
know, but
where
it's like, why not?
It's like, because they rotate, and it's like Somalia's turn, and it's like, hey, wait a minute, let's be real here. I'm sorry, I don't believe that any international body headed up by the nation of Somalia is legitimate, should be taken seriously, or should receive a dollar of American public funds. And so there is an absurdity to this. And the World Economic Forum is in some ways the least absurd because it's the highest concentration of sophistication. But even that order is cracking. Like I'll tell you even a personal anecdote from this week. One of the panelists who was heading to Davos emails me, hey, I'm on the plane. I haven't done my homework. I'm supposed to issue a criticism of DEI in universities. Can you give me some bullet points and some stories to give me some evidence? And so the subversion of this kind of opinion that was believed to be inevitable a couple years ago, in my view, is well underway.
Yeah, so I mean, this is right, and maybe part of the domestic tension is that there's a part of the Trump faction, the MAGA faction, that doesn't want to just merely divest from these obligations. Okay, yes, we're paying a lot and maybe paying too much, but do we want to get to a point where we're paying nothing? And actually, the answer is maybe not, actually. There are soft power benefits from being the source of military protection for Western Europe. And there might be really good reasons why we want to maintain bases in Germany. And it may not be merely out of some NATO-derived obligation to forestall Russian expansionary ambitions. There may be reasons that are merely about favorable trade deals, about like having some leverage so that when you do want to get some special access to, let's say, a place like Denmark, you don't have to do this kind of like blustering, posturing where you go and twist everyone's arms publicly and make a big display about our military prowess relative to these counterparties. We can go behind the scenes and say, hey, we're doing this for you. Here's what we want in return. Now, I presume those kinds of conversations did happen or may have happened at some point, although maybe not. And I wonder what kinds of response Trump and his team got when they went to, the foreign minister of Denmark or their prime minister or whoever is in charge of these negotiations. They might have been rebuffed. There might have been a kind of ungrateful response to Trump and our efforts to really sort of claim what is rightfully ours in Greenland without creating all of this international turmoil. So I don't know what happened there. By now, I'm willing to give Trump a lot of leeway. Okay, like how many times do we have to see this movie? It's actually shocking to me that people online are still like, oh, this is, Trump finally has gone too far in his, negotiation tactics. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like, we do this every month. Aren't you bored of this cycle by now? Like, have you forgotten, like, the last 10 years? But even that said, I do wonder if there are ways of doing this that might at the same time allow us to get what we want while still allowing for a kind of controlled demolition of these Eurocrat institutions rather than emboldening these institutions and galvanizing what might be kind of like lukewarm, like domestic European domestic support for these institutions who are suddenly going, no, we need this now. This like justifies the whole existence of the EU as this regulatory like super state so that we have some leverage against the bullies in the United States. So we don't want that either. Is there a way of kind of navigating these two things simultaneously and getting both? I don't know. I hope so. Maybe that's where this is all going eventually.
It could be, but maybe I'll make the case against it, which is, well, we are providing the military backbone of Europe, and we're not getting a fair deal. They're not spending their 2% of GDP. They're not being reasonable on negotiations for security bases, missile defense in Greenland. They aren't kind of negotiating on the trade deals in a way that reflects the balance of power or the tremendous benefit they're already getting. And I think part of it is because we've never asked before. We have just maintained the post-World War II international order without asking for kind of reciprocal benefit in return. And then Trump's personality is very off-putting for many Europeans. I mean, he's not a popular figure in Europe. And so European leaders are ultimately responsible for maintaining their popularity with their European voters. And if they were to do the Viktor Orban approach, of kind of flattering Trump, cozying up to Trump, caressing Trump in the public square, they would be facing strong headwinds at home. And so we're in this very difficult position where we're providing this huge benefit. The return is kind of dubious, and I don't know. My sense is maybe more isolationist than yours, which is surprising. Usually we're on the other side. But my sense is like, what are we getting from this? Just stop.
Well,
we can negotiate bilateral trade deals. We can negotiate peace. The reality is the G7 is more important than the UN. Like the negotiations that happen in the G7 are more important. And then we don't have to maintain this like global infrastructure of UN refugee offices. Just forget it. We're not getting the benefit out of it. It's not worth the expense. It's pure theater. Just get out.
Okay. So, all right. So the carve out to the Don Rowe doctrine that I'm trying to sort of construct here, and I'm like realizing it as I'm talking myself into this, is that Europe is a part of American empire in some sense. I mean, or there is a special sort of European civilizational project that we share with Western Europe, and therefore our fates are tied in a way that, like, if this was, I don't know, like Southeast Asia or something, and there were similar sort of like trade benefits and these economies were working in a similar way with each other, but it didn't have this sort of like civilizational continuity, maybe we just like say, okay, we got to just focus on what's happening right here. We're going to divest for right now from a more integrated relationship with Southeast Asia.
That's exactly what we did after Vietnam. We were holding up
exactly.
Vietnam.
But now I'm sitting here going, well, we're all Europeans together, and maybe that matters for something. And I don't know. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's like misguided. Maybe it's more narrowly about like the Anglosphere, and that's like a separate category of concern than just Western European largely. I think this is just a kind of bias that I have. And I think like a lot of Americans have. I don't think I'm alone in this. Obviously, the history of our engagements with Western Europe precede this like, sort of idiosyncratic interest in idiosyncratic interest in Europe. Like a lot of people in American history sort of has this embedded in it. How far does that go? Are there limits on it? Do we retreat now and just sort of like focus on the Western Hemisphere as a sort of geographically defined and exclusive category of concern? Maybe. But I have a hard time just like waving goodbye to Western Europe. I don't know. It's a certain romanticism about our relationship with them, I guess, and these sort of cultural frailties that I feel. So that's all.
Well, I feel them too, right? We are, as you said, a European civilization. America was founded on fundamentally European ideas, mostly Anglo, but also borrowing from the Romans, from the Greeks, from the, biblical tradition. And yet we're something separate, right? We were the kind of refugees from Europe that were going to the New World, establishing a new civilization that was based on the past, but fundamentally different and new in some other way. And yeah, we've had, we've fought with European countries. We've worked with European countries. The relationship has always been one of cooperation, conflict, tension, release. It changes over time. And I guess the question is now, what is the ideal? And is it possible? And is the current situation, framework, the best way to get there? And look, I think we should have close relationships with Europe. But I also think that Europe should be self-sustaining. And to the extent that we are floating the continent, they'll never be self-sustaining because they're, kind of like they're like a dependent state, but acting as if they were an independent. It's like the relationship between a parent and a teenager, a ungrateful teenager. So I don't know. I don't know what the relationship with Europe looks like long term. But I think Trump is correct in the short term to start shaking up the status quo and to start demanding that Europe, at least carry its own weight in some of these fundamental ways. And at the other side of it, look, I hope that the Europeans do see an affinity, and you're going to have these big civilizations coming to power in the next 100 years. And the question is, how is the world organized? And the natural fit is for Europe to be in America's sphere, instead of, China's sphere or Russia's sphere or some kind of third worldist sphere. And I don't know, time will tell. Lomez, we are still in the dead of winter, and I trust that you are drinking a lot of hot tea. Is that right?
I am. I'm enjoying my Kindred Harvest microplastics-free tea. The wife and I have been watching the great 9/11 era, action, thriller, drama 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, before bed. And I've been pairing that with some sleep time Kindred Harvest tea. My heart rate goes up, but then the sleep time, it brings me back down to a reasonable heart rate, and I can get to sleep. It's delicious. And we love Kindred Harvest over at the Lomez household.
That's very interesting. So your physiology is perfectly balanced. And you know what else is perfectly balanced? The flavor in Kindred Harvest tea. And so if you want to try the tea, make it your nighttime routine, head over to kindredharvest.co. That's kindredharvest.co. And use the promo code Rufo for 20% off. It's a great product made by great people, and we know you'll enjoy it. Let's talk a little bit more about Greenland, because this is something that you and I have discussed a little bit. Like, is it a good idea? How far should we go? Like, is this important? This has become a headline. It was kind of a joke the first term. Now it's back. How are you thinking about it?
I do like the idea of getting Greenland. I think it would be a sort of not capstone achievement, but it would be up there on the sort of level of achievements for Trump. And it's sort of a top line item in, the history of his presidency, should it happen. I think there's a lot of benefit to having Greenland. I think it's very true. I don't think it's merely symbolic. So I think it's very true that there are very real material, practical benefits having to do with resources there. It's also true that, there are shipping lanes that may become more meaningful either as a product of ongoing, global warming. Okay, this is a concept we can maybe touch on this later. Whatever the case is, it does appear that it's possible that those could become major shipping lanes, that Northwest Passage, and we want to be able to control that. And there's also very good, it sounds like, defense reasons for having control of that territory. And it sounds like both Russia and China also want control of that territory. And so there's a real contest here over who this belongs to, who gets to assert their sort of like hegemonic rule over this place. Maybe it's actually in some way a good thing if Denmark kind of formally holds the keys to Greenland, but we, in effect, get to do basically whatever we want there. I like the idea of us owning Greenland and having Greenland permanently. But, again, it's like, how do we go about doing this? Do we do this through this kind of like forceful bullying, which we could, and which is, I can understand why that's sort of attempting to kind of assert our dominance here, but we might be better off, with a prudent negotiation. Everybody feels happy, even if some feathers get ruffled in the meantime. We want to be able to have productive conversations with Denmark and say, look, this is what we plan on doing with it. We're not going to treat you like these, backwater, subordinate people who can't handle their own territory. This is your legitimate claim, and we're going to come up with a meaningful exchange here so that we now take it into our domain. I think that can happen. I hope that can happen. It may have to go behind the scenes. It may take a while to settle out. I think this kind of like heated surface rhetoric, this is a long-time Trump negotiation tactic. Maybe it works. I have no reason. I mean, look, Trump's Trump, and he's in his position for a reason. So again, I am not going to doubt his wisdom in this regard. But I think going forward, this is something we can pursue maybe in a more subtle and less antagonistic way.
So let me make the case, and I'm not really sure if I believe it, but I'll make it, and maybe we can discuss. I'll make the other side of the case, which is this is a nostalgic 1980s Cold War era geopolitical strategy. It's like playing Risk, right? You want to get Iceland or Greenland or whatever at the top of the Risk board because it's the portal to, Europe. And it doesn't serve any immediate purpose. The threat of nuclear war with Russia is, minuscule. We didn't have it during the Cold War when Risk was much higher. This antagonizes foreign allies. And fundamentally, we're trying to have an expansionist foreign policy with this when our country is already, functionally, bankrupt or heading towards bankruptcy. Is this the last kind of nostalgic but ultimately foolish expansionist strategy where we can't even really maintain our own territory? Something like that argument, as much as I'm like, cool, we're going to take Greenland. That sounds fun. We should do it. Very exciting. Rah, rah. Part of me is like, there's some skepticism to it. And that's kind of what the skepticism, takes form for me.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're in this situation where we have to speculate about the nature of this, utility calculus they're doing with respect to Greenland. And it may be they're saying, okay, this is just like this political, symbolic, chauvinistic demonstration of power to conceal what is otherwise, a kind of decrepit, empire or something. I certainly hope not. I don't see evidence for that elsewhere, which is why I'm kind of skeptical that that's what's going on. Rather, it's, okay, there are like, at some point, you have to trust, like, the people you vote for, they go in, they share your interests. I have seen in the State Department other decisions they're making that indicate they're not acting in this kind of, capricious way, that they're actually very cognizant of these sort of material costs and benefits. And they've calculated that, no, this is good. We want this. This is to our benefit. It may be that they should be communicating this a little bit better. And so, like, this goes back to the tariff thing, by the way, previously.
Like, where's Rubio, for example? Why isn't Rubio making the reasonable case while Trump makes the top line unreasonable case?
Right, because what we're all you see on the surface is the chaos. You just see this like sort of tumultuous, kind of like ad hoc flailing, this kind of lashing out, and that's what's going on the surface. Underneath the surface, though, there may be something more complex. And I guess now sometimes you can't articulate those things because it then reduces your leverage. Okay, you can't say what it is the actual motivations are. You have to say, well, this is about, preserving the rights of the native Greenlanders or something, which is just like obviously ridiculous.
We want freedom for the native Greenlanders. Yeah.
They deserve better.
They need democracy.
Their poor rights are being subverted by the oppressive Danes. Okay. A tale as old as time. We got to do this sort of like ridiculous posturing, but I'm just kind of trusting. I'm trusting.
You're a plan truster.
And again, it's because that trust has been earned, I think, in my calculus. That trust has been earned by what's going on elsewhere and what we've seen in the past. And so, okay, I have some expectation that this is either going to resolve in our favor or, as many things happen with Trump, they just kind of disappear.
Yeah.
And then you're left with this sort of vague memory of like, there was that thing that happened with the thing, and I kind of remember people being upset about it, but frankly, so much has gone on in the last 2 years. I don't know. Let's move on to the next thing. And it could just be one of those things where 2 years from now, someone brings up Greenland. You're like, I don't know, man. I don't really remember what you're talking about.
Were we going to build a Trump hotel in Greenland?
Yeah,
Something like that?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So.
I think that's right. And to kind of button up this conversation, I feel the same way about Gaza. So Jared Kushner released this PowerPoint presentation at the World Economic Forum with like AI rendered like, futuristic civilization on the Gaza Strip, and how the GDP is going to be out of control. There's going to be luxury hotels. And part of me is like, oh my gosh, this is insane. We should have no part in this. We can't rebuild Detroit. Why are we going to rebuild the Gaza Strip? But then part of me is like, this is bullshit. I think they know it's bullshit, and they're peddling this bullshit to buy time for whatever real material interests are happening behind the scenes. And so you kind of just turn it off and you say, this is going to just go away. It's going to be a PowerPoint, vaporware that never goes anywhere. Everything will be fine. So that was kind of my impression. I think Greenland is more serious, certainly. But yeah, there's always the possibility that it just disappears.
But you know, you got to be Zen Buddhist Trump here. Okay, let's
the
move
Tao
on.
of Trump. This is the Tao of Trump.
Break first, though. Yeah,
taking what?
We're gonna take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're gonna be going to our next story. I want to pause for a minute for Chris to tell you something extremely important.
Yeah, it is time. You have to be following the Rufo and Lomez show on Facebook, on Instagram, on Spotify, on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, all of the various platforms. We're going to be putting out great clips of the show, plus the full episodes. So make sure, whatever you're scrolling on, take a minute, sign up, like, and subscribe. Okay, what's next on our list? It is a long story, maybe a overlong story in Politico magazine about the startup university, the University of Austin. Not the University of Texas at Austin, but a new private university founded by some, kind of people in our circle, the venture capitalist Joe Lonsdale, the rising media mogul Barry Weiss, a number of other people loosely affiliated with the so-called intellectual dark web. Niall Ferguson, who was just criticizing DEI at the World Economic Forum. I think, look, on the whole, I don't have total alignment with everyone, but these are serious people. They're trying to start a serious institution. But, Politico, of course, as any effort, that would be perceived as right of center, gets, rough media treatment. So what was in this Politico story, and what do you make of it?
What it is just a kind of portrait of a university in disarray, an institution that's falling apart, an institution that had certain high hopes to begin with, but now the realities of trying to run a university and align yourself with various right-wing figures has run its natural course. And of course, the right isn't allowed to exist in this country. We can't have anything on the right have any kind of formal power or attempt to do anything serious. So, as a dutiful liberal apparatchiks here at Politico, we're going to write this story, which, by the way, was published alongside a series of other articles, all in the same 3-day window about what is truthfully a year-old story. So this has been saved up for a while now. Part of this is having to do with Barry Weiss. People don't like Barry Weiss. They want her out at CBS. So there's a lot going on here. But the crux of it is UATX, the University of Austin, was a failed experiment. The right can't do this. There are all these defections. It's run into all these problems. And what started out as perhaps a noble, ambition to have this politically neutral institution that didn't suffer from the sort of pathological excesses of other institutions of higher ed in this country, it has ultimately fallen victim to its own ideological capture. And that ideological capture is represented here in the figure of Joe Lonsdale, who's on the board of trustees and was a major financial donor to the university, and who at some meeting basically said there's not going to be any communists at this university. Okay, we're going to have a no communist policy. And this triggered a series of defections. And I think actually, okay, it's like a 10,000 word article. It's like completely ridiculous how long this is, and could have been written in like 1,500 words, because all this other like actual specific stuff is incidental to the larger point. And it is asking an interesting question here. And it's not the question the piece is focused on, but it's the one that matters for us, I think. And that question is, can you have a university, and you're particularly well suited to answer this because of some of the work you did like at New College of Florida. So I'm genuinely curious about this. Can you have a university that is firstly defined by being non-woke? Okay, it's defined in some sense by what it is not. And so we have this idea of the kind of default modal United States American university in the year 2025. And it's just this den of, lefty DEI, identity politics, social justice, what we call gay race communism, okay? And what
the
we're
GRC.
What we're trying to do here is something else. We want to just reject that as a model and build something that is just not that. So, okay, is that enough to form the basis of a university, or do you need something else?
I think you need something else. And it's a question that I've thought about for a number of years now. And I've thought about it in particular with the University of Boston. And I think University of Boston is a great experiment. I think they have great people. The new president over there, Carlos Carvalho, who was formerly a professor of statistics at University of Texas, is unbelievable. Just a fantastic leader, great scholar, and he has the toughness that's required to actually make those hard decisions. So I think they're in good hands. Lonsdale's no communism policy seems completely sensible to me. Especially for a private university. Hey, you have to have limits somewhere. What are the limits? That's completely fine. But here's the problem.
I mean, we can come back to that.
Let's come back to that.
Yeah.
But here's the basic question as I see it. When this started, it was, I think, defined, at least in the public sphere, as somewhat oppositional. It was the anti-woke or non-woke elite alternative. They wanted to compete with the Ivy League by maintaining some of their prestige and intelligence and seriousness without all of the kind of woke DEI, race and gender baggage that had accumulated in those competitive institutions. The problem, though, and this is a problem I saw very early on and tried to, communicate it at the time, was you're bringing people into the fold that you think are going to give you legitimacy or prestige. I'm thinking of Harvard professor Steven Pinker or former Harvard president Larry Summers, or some members of the IDW more broadly who were kind of liberals who became disappointed with liberal excess, caught them totally by surprise. But I think where they failed in that initial step, and now they're correcting for it, is that those people were never going to give a full-throated, courageous, principled defense of the institution once it became like a minimum amount of costly for their reputations to uphold. And in the case of Steven Pinker and Larry Summers personally, and I have experience with both of these people, they're people of very low character. They're constantly calculating for career concerns. They have a history of throwing people under the bus. I mean, the stories that I've heard behind the scenes are it's like these are bad people with bad character that are jumping on your project because it's the shiny new thing. But the second that they're going to yield a benefit from trashing your project publicly, that's what they're going to do. Lo and behold, that's exactly what they did. And then publicly trashing it, publicly, kind of signaling against it in a really petty and cheap way. And so that's like the tabloid drama. We can get into it, but the more serious idea here is, anti-woke is not enough. You actually have to have a coherent, not ideology, which is thin and brittle, but a coherent set of principles that your university is founded on. And for UATX, I think there actually is something like that available. And I would encourage them to really lean into it. And the brand that I see for them and the set of principles that they could, build out their public reputation on is this really interesting hybrid between the classical liberal arts, Greek philosophy, great literature, a kind of Straussian, Straussian-inspired, political philosophy that you see in with some of the faculty at UATX, combined with a techno-futurist, patriotic, American, industrial vision of kind of leadership in business and technology and innovation. I think that's a natural fit. I think there's some tension between the two, but it could be an interesting basis for a university. And so you'd get students that were ambitious to become, intellectuals or artists or entrepreneurs or inventors. It's actually a very American thing. And you see this even with the founding. You see people, the founding fathers, the signers of the Declaration, they were passionate about political philosophy. Many of them were very, deeply learned, but they were also the entrepreneurs, the businessmen, and the impresarios of their time. And so I think there's some depth there. Yeah. I hope that if you're listening, Carlos, tell your marketing team, this is the direction we're going. This is the curriculum that we want to see, and fight it out. I think that one thing they've done really well, and Lonsdale in particular has done well, is to say, no, I'm not going to accept the premise of, polite, effeminate, kind of passive aggressive in academic debate. No, we're actually going to talk about these issues bluntly, and we're going to get the job done. I appreciate that about them.
So, okay, I think as a marketing matter and as a matter of public presentation, that is exactly right, okay? You are trying to create an institution that has as its sort of fundamental ambition the conveyance of knowledge for its own sake, Plato's Olive Grove, okay? The academy where you learn philosophy and you negotiate over these difficult questions of what is true and how to find truth and, the grounding for our epistemologies and what it means for something to be beautiful and sort of moral reason. Okay, all this stuff. And then you also have a kind of more a sort of like phronesis, okay, like practical know-how. You're teaching the application of these things for the real world, okay? So now we're going to go build stuff, and you're going to take the abstract knowledge, and you're going to learn how to translate that into economy, okay, into the making of things. That's great. That's beautiful. I love that as an ambition for a college, but maybe I'm overly cynical here, but the thing that sort of liberals and the left understands about college, maybe not even explicitly, this is just sort of an intuitive understanding that I don't think the right understands. I think like the University of Austin people are like too pure, is that they haven't asked themselves what actually is the purpose of a college and the purpose of higher learning in our modern economy and in the 21st century. And the answer is actually like kind of depressing, but it's fine once you sort of like realize that that's what's going on, which is this is not, unfortunately, about the cultivation and expansion of like human capital. What colleges are just doing is like, these are credentialing mechanisms. It's a project of social governance. What we're doing is like, we're creating compliant professionals. We're creating people who can go out into the world and understand implicitly the sort of moral and behavioral demands of functioning within these larger bureaucracies. You're learning a script, okay? And like what Harvard does really well is not so much that it like teaches Plato or Shakespeare or something better than like Penn State. It doesn't, okay? What it does do, though, is provide a kind of implicit script that all Harvard graduates have as a kind of touchstone for the behavioral expectations that they're going to encounter, whether they end up at McKinsey or the Ford Foundation. And you go to these institutes, and this is why actually like DEI stuff is so good for higher ed, because it's perfect for creating compliant people who then will seamlessly enter into these bureaucracies and know exactly what to say and what not to say. It's like, it's perfect. It's perfect instruction for the kinds of like cognitive tools that they actually need to succeed in the world. This is sort of depressing, okay? Like it is depressing, but that is actually what's going on. And in fact, the reason why higher ed doesn't want conservatives anywhere around is because it's bad for the students. If they have a charismatic right-wing professor who calls into question this script and starts saying, wait a minute, are you sure that these things that your like, crazy Marxist critical theory professor taught you are actually real? Does that actually map onto reality? Is it actually the case that, you're walking around with this thing called white privilege? Oh, it's actually bad if a student starts actually taking that seriously, because when they then show up at the Ford Foundation or they try to apply for a job at McKinsey and they're doing their consulting or this or that or the other thing, they're not going to they might say the wrong thing. They might stray from the script that actually like jeopardizes their job and disrupts the continuity, hard-won, hard-fought continuity of those institutions. Okay, that's the reality. So now there's a much bigger sort of conditioning that needs to be addressed here. And it's like, all right, we still want to do all that stuff with the truth and the beauty and all that. But also, we got to understand that alongside UTX, there are all these other parallel institutions arising where we're going to have like right-wing people exist and articulate their views coherently and with conviction. And we're going to do this at our federal bureaucracies. And if you want to go, to work at Heritage or the Trump, great. But also, we're going to make room for you now in Silicon Valley. And if you want to go work at some of these VC firms, there's going to be a place for you. But there's going to be a new script. We're going to have a new set of like intellectual, moral touchstones that we rely on to facilitate this kind of social governance under this new sort of right-wing or like conservative milieu. So what a university like UATX needs to do is not, maybe again, as a marketing matter, you're pointed in the direction of this sort of like neutral thing. But you want to get together with places like Hillsdale, and you want to find people at New College and elsewhere, and in a way that's sort of like tacit. And I think there are cultural institutions, and honestly, I'm going to shill here. This is something we're trying to do with Passage, with our publishing company. We need to create this larger infrastructure here with a set of historical points of reference, with a set of sort of philosophical, with a canon that exists for our purposes, where there is a kind of continuity between what all of these people are doing, so that when we do graduate from UATX and enter into this larger world, we can find each other and sort of create things with each other without having to completely then like default back into a liberal way of being. Okay, that's like the big overarching sort of problem here I see is a lack of understanding of what we're actually trying to do with these parallel institutions.
I think that, here's where I mean, I think you're right, but I think you're underestimating how much they do understand that. And I think by shedding people like Pinker and Summers and the wishy-washy IDW people, they wanted to have an ecumenical, non-woke university. That was the original vision. But as the Political article states, there were like a series of Straussian purges of the institution and an evolution into something that is a little tougher, a little more hard-edged, a little bit more realist.
Yeah.
And I think that's where they're going. And my anticipation as we get towards their first graduating class and then beyond that is they're very conscious of this, and there already is an infrastructure. You can go to Palantir, you can go to 8VC, Lonsdale's firm, you can go to Tesla or SpaceX, you can go to Andreessen Horowitz, you can go to Doge, you can go to some of the other quieter companies around Silicon Valley. I think that is there. I think there will be kind of charitable and philanthropic initiatives that spin out of this. They can work at Passage. They can work for me and some of my initiatives. I think they know this, and I think they're building that. And my hope is that with the new leadership that's there, and then these trials and tribulations, look, these are ugly hit pieces, attack articles, smears, betrayals, right? A lot of these people who, bought into the university are now stabbing them in the back. I actually think that's very good long term, because my original critique was, hey, these people are going to stab you in the back. These people are unreliable. These people are ultimately not aligned with where I think the deeper purpose is, and for status reasons or whatever, they're going to betray you. You just have to get through that, and through that difficult experience, you actually feel a stronger sense of your own principles, right? Because these are tests. And I think that this is a trial by fire that ultimately be very good. And they're doing some really incredible things. And the last point I'd make before we go to the final story is it's actually really hard to start a university. It's not an easy thing to do. And they've been enormously successful. And so we should remember in our minds, and look, you always want it to be bigger, better, faster, smarter, stronger, whatever superlatives we can throw up there. But it takes time. It's really difficult. And what I would say is, knowing many of the people that are involved, these are serious people. They're doing the best that they can, and I think it's getting better and better. And these changes, staffing changes, leadership changes, curriculum changes, all of these things are normal, and you can't compare it to Harvard, which has existed since the 1600s. It's just a different thing, and I wish them well.
I have nothing but utmost respect for the people doing this. Okay, believe me, this is incredibly difficult, and they're first to really put their hat in the ring here and try something, and it's incredibly risky. It's incredibly financially risky. It's reputationally risky. I have great respect for the students, for the faculty, everybody involved. Truly, truly.
And maybe the Lomez kids will go there one day, right? Yeah.
maybe, honestly. I'd go teach there, honestly, okay? I'm not, maybe, okay? If they
Carlos,
wanted me. I really would. I think it'd be fun. But I think it does require some, and perhaps, like you said, these conversations are happening, but it can't just be unwoke, and it can't have as its target that it's aiming at 2010s liberalism. That will just lead us back to this spot. Okay, that's not enough. There has to be this larger sort of structural understanding of the purpose of the university vis-a-vis the students and the kind of person that you're trying to cultivate, and the kind of mind space, this kind of mental palace that you're trying to sort of create. And it extends beyond just what the texts are and the curriculum that you're giving them. There's a whole kind of exegesis that the faculty must sort of deliver as an interpretive project on those texts, so that they are equipped to sort of enter this modern economy and understand what they're up against, and also find each other. You're giving them these little shibboleths that they can go out and say, I read that too, or I have an understanding of this particular historical episode. And it's not entirely arbitrary. It's not arbitrary, but it is just this signal that identifies someone like you who you can have then like a productive professional relationship with. Okay. I think they get this maybe intuitively on some level, but it is worth, I think, just explicating in that way. But okay, good. UATX, we support you at the Rufo and Lomez show.
Yeah, you can become an official sponsor. Talk to the Blaze. Last story. This is a kind of feel good story. It's the win of the week. Earlier this week, Judge Glock, my colleague at Manhattan Institute, and I published an investigative report about the Small Business Administration's 8A program, which is in effect a $26 billion slush fund for government contracts that are available to every identity group except for one: white men. And so the SBA is spending billions of dollars a year, no bid contracts through all of these shell companies that are sometimes in practice, but sometimes only as a matter of appearances, run by minorities, Native Americans, and then in a related program, women. We blew the whistle on this and made the case that this was a corrupt program. It was totally in violation of the president's stated principles against DEI. And it's been a year. And so why does this program even exist? After the piece published, I got a call from the SBA administrator, Kelly Loeffler. I got a call from a number of people at the White House, some of whom were a bit annoyed that we had brought this scandal to public attention, but all of whom recognized, yep, we've dropped the ball on this. It's totally unjust. We're going to take action. And lo and behold, within 48 hours, just earlier this morning, SBA Administrator Loeffler, who has taken legitimately good steps over the last year, don't get me wrong, announced that white men would now be permitted to join the 8A program. It's not a perfect solution. I think the program should be abolished, but it's at least a step in the right direction to say, hey, wait a minute. We're not going to have a program that distributes billions of dollars to every single group in this country except for one. We're not going to do that anymore. That's a relic of the past. It has to stop.
It's totally insane. Okay, let me start. Is his name actually Judge Glock?
Judge Glock is his birth name. That is a real name. Yeah.
Okay, this has the potential for like the greatest instance of nominative determinism like ever in history. I don't know where that's all headed, but amazing. Okay,
he's a big guy too. He's a pretty big guy. So yeah, you're like that name
saw
fits
the byline,
physically.
I was
it
like,
works.
That can't.
Yeah.
That can't be right. That can't be the guy's name. But that's great. Amazing name. I guess the question here to me is like, this is so obvious. And by the way, this exists kind of everywhere. There are like state level programs that are like this. You know, if you want to like get a earthquake retrofitting contract, like in California, I have a friend who he has a firm, and his wife happens to be Filipina, and so he had to make her the owner of the company so that they could get preferential treatment like on these contracts. Okay, it's like totally insane, obviously corrupt. And like we've become so conditioned to this sort of stuff that you just sort of like shrug your shoulders and go, yeah, of course I just had to make my wife do this because we have to like do these diversity, benefits contracts or whatever. And it's completely insane. And I guess the question is, at this point, it sounds like there's like a whole industry in place of middlemen who are they skim a little bit off, and it sounds like they take these contracts and they subcontract to whoever. And it's probably like largely white guys, I assume, who are like running these companies or, are involved in this. So it's like, it's not like white guys aren't getting a piece of the pie. We just have to go through this insane sort of Rube Goldberg machine, like middlemen pass through, and these, whatever token minority also gets their taste, gets their beak wet too. Okay, I guess like my question here is it the case that they're not just abolishing this whole thing because, as Washington is, there's just too many people who are sort of dependent on this, some of whom might even be Republicans or friendly to the administration, and we're just having to play the game of, look, we know this is bad, but these are our friends, And sometimes in politics, you just got to sort of weigh the cost of alienating people over here versus the cost of kind of just, letting these not great things kind of continue, because that's just how politics, and that's just the friction of Washington, D.C.
Some of that, and a couple of reasons. One is, from my reporting on this, the White House had contemplated just unilaterally winding down the program, declaring it unconstitutional, and taking it to the courts. From what I heard from a number of people is that the White House lawyers, Department of Justice said, hey, you can't do that. It's a statutory program. You have to release regulations, go through public comment, do the whole song and dance, the typical Washington routine. So the action was stalled, from what I've been told, for a number of months in kind of legal limbo. And only because we published this story were they able to start getting that policy process moving again. There also is, as you suspect, though, an element of kind of longstanding corruption and complicity from Republicans. And so one interesting fact about these programs is that an unbelievable amount of this cash, billions of dollars a year, goes to the great state of Alaska, and is routed through kind of nominally Alaska Native-owned companies that then subcontract to, in the most part, white men that are running the real companies that are doing the work. And guess what? The Senate, at least one senator from Alaska, Senator Sullivan, has apparently, according to sources that I talked to, made it known throughout the administration, we need to keep this cash flowing because he's dependent. Tribes are pretty powerful in a state like Alaska and other states like Oklahoma and other red states where there are big tribal populations. They have big lobbying operations. They have big political organizations, a network of businesses, casinos, constructions, contracting, et cetera. And so there is an element of, what I think is legal corruption, even in red states, even with Republican politicians, where they keep this disastrous program alive. And the calculus is nobody's paying attention to this. Nobody cares enough about this. Even though it's $26 billion, it's not enough money to be, a top line program. We know it's a dirty business, but we're going to take our cut. We're going to keep it going. And so I felt a little bit scandalized, to be honest. I felt very upset about this. That's why I worked with Judge on the piece, which was say, hey, wait a minute. We had BLM, 10 years of the debate about BLM. We won the debate. We won the election. We won no DEI. Why are we doing this? And, to the White House officials that were, a little bit upset, oh, you're making us look bad. We're working on it. We promise we'll get to it. In one hand, I get it. It's a hard job. There's a million things. This is low down on the list. But on the other hand, it's saying, hey, wait a minute. No, it's been a year. You guys have to get rid of this. And so my statement today, earlier this morning, although we're recording Thursday, they're letting white men into the program. I guess that's good, but my suspicion is that it will still heavily favor the other groups. And the only truly morally defensible position is to get rid of it. And so I think they should blow it up. I think they should go nuclear. I think they should just say, we will not administer programs that violate the Constitution. Sue us. Let's take it to the courts.
Yeah. Chris, the other thing I'm thinking here is just this larger picture that I think a lot of people are seeing about the way our country works. And I include myself in this. And, you're seeing how the sausage gets made more and more. And we're just seeing corruption everywhere. Everybody is just like taking their little piece of the pie. And there's fraud everywhere. And it's all bullshit. Okay. And you're like an average guy working, paying taxes, or like trying to start a company. And you know how hard it is to go out and like make a product that people want and then sell it, and the difficulties and risks involved and the time and like putting your entire life on the line to do something hard and to make yourself, to make your own nut, to till your own soil. It's incredibly difficult. And then people just see everyone else, like billions and billions and billions of dollars in fraud. And there's this real legitimacy crisis. This isn't like a novel observation. I think, this feeling has been underlying a lot of our politics probably over the last, 20 years or so. Okay. A lot of the Tea Party stuff was even sort of fomented around a lot of this same feeling of corruption and just reckless spending, and that we'd sort of abandoned the people in this country who are doing all the work. They're putting all the food on the table, but they're the last to eat. Okay.
Yes.
And we can't have it be that our guy gets into office and lets this kind of stuff continue. It has to be that our response to liberal graft and liberal fraud, which is very real and orders of magnitude over anything the right is doing, and this giant NGO complex that is just sucking up public money, okay, and is sucking up our resources, that we don't just make the same mistake of allowing some of this to continue because it happens to be that some Republican voters are also getting their beaks wet. We have to be I think pretty stern and pretty disciplined that we're going to be the responsible ones, okay? We're going to practice discipline here. And I know there's another version of this argument, which is, no, this is an empire in decline. This is our turn. And it's, we're going to go in and raid the treasury and redistribute it to our people while we have our opportunity to do so. And that's what this is all about. This is just a back and forth between us and them. And when it's our turn, we just get to give out all this stuff to our friends. And when they come in, it's understood that they're going to do the same. And we might sort of complain publicly that, they're doing this horrible thing. But we all know that that's just what's going on here. That's the game. I really don't think that is sustainable.
I'll add another wrinkle to it. And I think if we're going to be really honest and even honest with our own side, and frankly, that's what I was trying to do with this piece. Look, the Trump himself and some figures within the Trump administration are, let's say, less than perfect vehicles for this message on outrage over corruption. I mean, Trump has pardoned a lot of people who were convicted of multi-million or even multi-billion-dollar Medicaid fraud. Trump, I think it was during the transition, launched the Trump coin, basically a crypto shit coin that would, that was a marketing vehicle where he held, all of these tokens.
I have to say, I treat that separately. That's a separate category, by the way. I get it is though, because for me, there's
it's
this
a package
voluntary
deal.
opt-in.
It's a package deal.
Okay.
You accept. You have to accept it. You try to work where you can, but the pardons have been bad. The crypto thing, it's just oh my gosh. For me, I'm just I don't like it. I don't think it's right. I don't think it should be done. And there are a series of other decisions like that. And there's certainly, especially within the kind of administration's broader orbit, there are people that are making money in a way that raises at a minimum some suspicions. And so while I think the left's fraud and feather bedding is multiple orders of magnitude greater, 100x or even much more than that, I do feel what you feel, which is, man, you try to do the right thing. You try to start a business, you try to, achieve a just outcome in politics and expose corruption and get the Somali fraudsters, held accountable and get government policy doing the right thing. But then you see this massive just cascade of corruption all around you. And I felt that even this week. And you get up, you go to work, you do it again, you want to do the right thing. But there were moments, and I'll be honest with you, it's moments it's man, okay, let's say we get this 8A program shut down. Great, we should do it. But, we're in a Chinatown style situation here where is the corruption so great? Are the numbers so enormous? And is the virtue so scarce in Washington and elsewhere that we're the fools that are left, holding the bag? And so narratively, and again, you have to feel it, you have to acknowledge it, you have to process it, and then you have to keep moving on principle. But I would be lying if I said that I didn't have a moment of, even in victory, like we had a big victory. We're getting rid of this program that has been, around for 45 years, hopefully. You have that feeling like, oof, the victory is there's a tragic element to it, right? There is an irony, a kind of dark and cynical, ironic element that comes into that story that certainly doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and my last thing on this, because
did you put money into the Trump
flip
coin?
Side of it
are you an investor in the Trump coin?
No.
Okay, all right.
No, I actually I missed the Trump coin. I was like celebrating. I just missed it. Okay. But that to me is a little different. I could explain why, but maybe it's hair splitting, so who cares?
Yeah.
The point I want to make though is like, it's okay. Like, I know people, I think, maybe not, I don't know, who are probably going to get like government contracts for this or that because they're like providing something useful that like the federal government needs. And that's okay. Like, it's okay for there to be companies that exist and for people to be in business with the government. Like, there might be really good things that you're providing and you're making quality stuff, or you're providing a service or whatever it is that is useful for the government and facilitates a kind of disciplined and strong and good state capacity. Like, we need state capacity, and it's fine if that state capacity is going to private enterprise. That's all fine. And actually, that's how it should be. So I'm okay with that. I'm also okay, by the way, with the understanding that some fraction of a percent, maybe even 1% is going to be fraud. That's just how the world works. Fraud just exists in the system. It's like if you run a retail store, you just understand that some amount of your, product is going to get stolen. That's just like baked into the cake. It's unfortunate. You do what you can to prevent it, but it's just there. We have a situation though where it's like 10%. That's what Besant estimated, that our federal budget is 10% fraud. Okay, and that's the problem.
Yes.
So I don't want to like throw out the baby with the bathwater here. It's not that like federal contracting is bad on its face. It's just that there is so much transparent and brazen fraud, and we cannot engage in that, or we lose the very legitimacy that we need to uphold in order to have any durable long-term opportunity for governance, or people are just going to go back to the devil they knew before. Really, that's the other alternative.
Yeah, I think that's right. And
I've said my piece.
Yeah, it's a very complex question, and what's so funny is that this was like what Doge should have been and could have been. But of course, the left bullied Elon Musk through kind of lightweight domestic terrorism, lighting his Tesla dealerships on fire in some cases. Really pushed him out of that role, and so I'm hoping maybe there is like a return of Doge, but I think it's Chinatown, man. I think Elon looked at what was happening. He saw the fraud, he saw the abuse, he saw the waste. But the system around him, and in particular the left's system of like a decentralized violence and intimidation, gave him that end of Chinatown moment. Forget it, Elon. It's Washington, and so we're going to end on a down note this week, but. I'm sure we'll be back up next week on an optimistic note. Something will happen. But I think it's important that we don't sugarcoat it, too, even with this administration that you and I both really believe in, really support, really want to see succeed. These kind of in-house critiques, I think, are pretty valuable. So we'll leave it there this week. We'll be back next week. We're going to be full of energy and optimism. I just know it. And we're trying to build great stuff. See you next time.